Hey there, folks. Tonight we're diving headfirst into one of the most complex and, frankly, headache-inducing conflicts in recent history. The Israel-Palestine conflict. Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Now imagine a tiny piece of land, roughly the size of New Jersey, coveted by two groups of people with deep historical and religious ties. That's the Holy Land for you, claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians as their rightful homeland. For centuries, this region has been a religious and cultural melting pot, home to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. But let's be honest, folks, sharing isn't always easy, especially when everyone's claiming divine right to the same piece of real estate. Throw in political aspirations, international meddling, and a sprinkle of good old-fashioned mistrust, and you've got yourself a recipe for a conflict that's been simmering for over a century. So, how did we get here? Well, to understand this mess, we need to rewind the clock a bit. Let's go back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the Ottoman Empire still controlled much of the Middle East. During this time, Jewish immigrants began arriving in Palestine, driven by the Zionist movement which sought to establish a Jewish homeland. Meanwhile, the Arab population, who had been living there for centuries, were also developing a sense of national identity. After World War I, the British took control of Palestine and promised both Jews and Arabs conflicting things, further complicating the situation. Fast forward to 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan to create separate Jewish and Arab states. But this plan was met with resistance and led to further violence. The following year, Israel declared independence, leading to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which resulted in significant territorial changes and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Since then, the region has seen numerous wars, uprisings, and peace talks, but a lasting resolution remains elusive. Today, the conflict continues to shape the lives of millions, with both sides holding onto their historical grievances and aspirations for the future. Despite the ongoing strife, there are many who still hope for a peaceful resolution, believing that coexistence is possible. As we delve deeper into this conflict, let's keep in mind the human stories behind the headlines and the enduring hope for peace. For centuries, the Holy Land was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Think of it as the original Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and way more fezzes. Life wasn't always peachy under Ottoman rule, but different religious groups coexisted more or less. However, things started getting spicy in the late 19th century with the rise of Zionism, a movement advocating for a Jewish state in their ancestral homeland, Palestine. At the same time, Palestinian Arabs who'd been living there for ages weren't exactly thrilled about sharing their turf. Imagine inviting a houseguest to stay, and they suddenly start measuring for new curtains and rearranging your furniture. That's kind of what it felt like for the Palestinians. Tensions simmered as both sides dug in their heels, setting the stage for a showdown. As if things weren't complicated enough, World War I threw everything into chaos. The world was already a complex place, but the war added layers of confusion and turmoil that no one could have anticipated. The Ottoman Empire, bless its cotton socks, ended up on the losing side, a fate that would reshape the Middle East in ways that are still felt today, and the Holy Land fell under British control. This was a significant shift, as the British now had to manage a region with deep historical and religious significance. Now, the British, known for their stellar track record of tact and diplomacy, insert eye roll here, found themselves in a delicate position. They had to navigate a complex web of alliances and enmities, made promises to both Jews and Arabs, promises that were about as compatible as a vegan barbecue. These promises were not just casual remarks, they were commitments that both sides took very seriously. They promised Jews a national home in Palestine, a place where they could finally feel safe and secure after centuries of persecution, while also assuring Arabs independence after the war. The Arabs, who had fought alongside the British against the Ottomans, expected to gain their freedom and self-determination. Talk about playing both sides. This kind of political double-dealing was bound to lead to trouble. This double-dealing, my friends, was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It only fanned the flames of conflict. The promises made to both sides were irreconcilable, leading to inevitable clashes. With the world still reeling from the war, the situation in Palestine grew increasingly volatile. The region became a hotbed of tension and unrest, with both Jews and Arabs feeling betrayed and desperate. Jewish immigration increased, fueled by persecution in Europe, while Palestinian resentment festered. The influx of Jewish immigrants seeking refuge and a new life added to the already strained relations. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. The stage was set for a conflict that would shape the future of the Middle East for generations to come. Fast forward to 1947. The British, fed up with trying to referee this unholy mess, threw their hands up and decided to let the newly formed United Nations handle it. They had been struggling for years to maintain some semblance of order in the region, but the tensions between the Jewish and Arab populations had reached a boiling point. Brilliant idea, right? What could possibly go wrong? The hope was that an international body could bring a fresh perspective and a fair solution to the table. The UN, in its infinite wisdom, came up with a plan, the 1947 Partition Plan. This plan was supposed to be the magic bullet that would solve the problem once and for all. This plan proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem becoming an international zone. The idea was to create a balance, giving both groups a piece of the land they claimed as their own. On paper it might have sounded like a fair compromise, but in reality it was like trying to split a baby in half, messy and bound to leave everyone unhappy. The complexities of the region's demographics, history and emotions were far too intricate for such a straightforward solution. While the Jewish leadership reluctantly accepted the plan, seeing it as a stepping stone to statehood, the Palestinian Arabs, feeling like they were getting the short end of the stick, rejected it outright. They saw the plan as an unjust division of their homeland. The stage was set for a conflict that would forever alter the landscape of the Middle East. The rejection of the plan by the Palestinian Arabs led to immediate violence, and the ensuing war in 1948 resulted in the establishment of the State of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs. The consequences of this plan, intended to bring peace, instead sowed the seeds for decades of conflict and strife in the region. Section 5, 1948. A nation is born, a people displaced. In 1948, as the British packed their bags and bid a not-so-fond farewell, Israel declared independence. Mazel tov. However, this joyous occasion for one side marked the beginning of a catastrophe for the other. The declaration triggered the First Arab-Israeli War, a chaotic free-for-all involving neighboring Arab countries. The war resulted in a crushing defeat for the Arab armies and, more tragically, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes. This mass exodus, known as the Nakba, meaning catastrophe in Arabic, remains a deeply traumatic event in Palestinian collective memory. As a new nation emerged, another was left shattered, its people scattered and dispossessed. It was a victory tinged with tragedy, the ramifications of which continue to resonate to this day. Section 6, Wars and Walls, the conflict escalates. The decades that followed were marked by a series of wars, uprisings, and failed peace initiatives. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel swiftly captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem territories that were home to a significant Palestinian population. This victory, while cementing Israel's military dominance, also sowed the seeds for future conflict. The occupation of Palestinian territories, and the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, became major points of contention. The Palestinians, denied self-determination and living under Israeli control, launched two uprisings, or intifadas, in the late 1980s and early 2000s. These uprisings, met with often brutal force by the Israeli military, only deepened the cycle of violence and mistrust. Section 7, A Glimmer of Hope, the Oslo Accords. But amidst this seemingly endless cycle of conflict, there were glimmers of hope. In the 1990s, a handshake on a White House lawn signaled a potential breakthrough. The Oslo Accords, signed by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat, offered a roadmap for peace based on a two-state solution. It was a historic moment, filled with cautious optimism. Could this be the beginning of the end? Could these two sworn enemies finally find a way to coexist peacefully? Well, as we all know, the road to peace is paved with good intentions and unfortunately a whole lot of potholes. Section 8, Human Cost Stories from the Front Lines. It's easy to get bogged down in the political complexities of this conflict, but it's important to remember that behind the headlines, behind the checkpoints and concrete barriers, are real people whose lives have been irrevocably shaped by this conflict. There's the Israeli mother in Tel Aviv, living in constant fear of rocket attacks, and the Palestinian shopkeeper in Ramallah, struggling to keep his business afloat under the weight of occupation. These are not just statistics, folks. These are human beings caught in a seemingly endless cycle of violence and despair. Section 9, Hummus Diplomacy, a lighter look at the divide. Now I know what you're thinking, John. This is heavy stuff. Can we lighten the mood a bit? Well, fear not, because even in the midst of conflict there's always room for a little humor. Take the great hummus debate, for example. Both Israelis and Palestinians claim this delicious chickpea spread as their own, with each side convinced that their recipe reigns supreme. It's a culinary rivalry for the ages, proving that even in the most intractable of conflicts, everyone can agree on the simple pleasures of a good dip. Section 10, What If? The Unanswered Questions. As we delve into the 21st century, the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains uncertain. The Oslo Accords, once a beacon of hope, have faltered, leaving many to wonder. Was peace ever truly within reach? What if Rabin and Arafat hadn't been tragically assassinated? What if both sides had shown greater compromise and restraint? Could history have unfolded differently? These are the what-ifs that haunt this conflict, serving as a reminder of the fragility of peace and the high cost of missed opportunities. Section 11. A legacy of conflict, a hope for peace. So, there you have it, folks. A crash course in the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's a messy, complicated story with no easy answers. But one thing is clear, this conflict is not just about land or religion. It's about the fundamental human need for security, identity, and a place to call home. As we've seen, the human cost of this conflict is immeasurable. Generations have grown up knowing nothing but division, checkpoints, and the ever-present threat of violence. But even in the darkest of times, hope flickers. Perhaps, just perhaps, by understanding the historical complexities and acknowledging the human narratives that shape this conflict, we can begin to imagine a different future. A future where peace, however elusive, remains the ultimate goal.